Today we are looking at Jean Bernard and a sleeping cat. Beautiful, beautiful drawing. So what we're going to do is I am going to draw a quick study, make it a 5-10 minute sketch, 15-minute sketch. Again, the time is not what's important. It's trying to find the level of looseness. So I'm going to use some sketch paper for that. I'm going to be drawing the final version maybe on my actual sketchbook where I'm studying all different kinds of quality of line, ink lines, different types of techniques for washes, and including other mediums like gouache or one of the ones we did recently, which was ink and watercolor. So I will consider doing it here in this sketchbook. I also have Bristol paper to do, again, really kind of infatuated with the version of watercolor pencils or water-soluble graphite, and then drawing on top of that layer. So again, this will be the other option, and this is my Bristol paper. So first, we will start with a quick study, quick sketch, and also it's a nice way to warm up. For that, I'm going to be using, I have my graphite mechanical pencil, but I also have these watercolor pencils and a water-soluble graphite. Now remember, the options here are limitless. You can use ink pens, charcoals. What is the purpose of this one here? So it's just a concept of getting familiar with your subject. So what is that going to take? Well, my composition. We're going to be looking at the looseness. I'm going to begin to feel the grip, feel the instrument. And that means some days we just had a little too much coffee. The pressure, we're seeing white knuckles. So loosen it up, make sure they're sharp. And we're going to, just as easy as with the very, very basic techniques of drawing, we're going to draw ovals or eggs. Try to get a little more the checklist, kind of like a pilot does with his systems check. And we look at fundamentals, techniques, negative space, basic shapes, but also grip. We're looking at levels of pressure. And I'm also paying attention to, am I seeing it today? Am I really, do I need, you have to give yourself, sometimes it takes 5, 10, 30 minutes to find your focus. Hopefully it happens while you're doing these. Quick, very, very loose. I'm really going a little more for blind drawing as much as possible here. And getting a sense of the pose, mostly of the head. So we look at that basic shape, and it's a really interesting one with the neck again back here. We could see that this artist loved playing with that and how it just gives us the full kind of that tilt, the tension, even the weight, how it's leaning over here to the side and just nicely, comfortably curling back into the body. We're looking at shapes within the shape. So here's another. And it begins to show us a little bit of muscle and anatomy. But just like that, with 3, 4 simple shapes, I begin to have something that is making me feel very comfortable. It's like getting to know your subject. Call this the icebreaker. The way I go into detail, I keep reminding you, see it as 3-dimensional shapes. So first we do line. From line we want to see shape. And then from shape we're going to develop form. So if you focus on the form while you're drawing your line, you're really adding a vision of what's coming next. And what do I mean by that? So it's not just the line of the eye. You want to see the roundness of the muscle and everything, including the bone around the socket, around the cheek, into the mouth, and sort of break them into pieces of the puzzle. Whether it's a cylinder, a cube, or it becomes more of even a donut here, or however you see it, that's what it takes. Beginning to see your subject, and I'm not even considering right now all of the line work. That would be hours and hours of work. My focus is going to be just composition. And I may have gone a little too far with this sketch already, but the reason I was using the water-soluble graphite is I'll bring in a brush and I'll play a little bit with this now as I continue examining the edges and some of the possibilities. So it's not just loosening up, warming up, seeing how I feel today. It's also testing, hey, is this technique, will this medium serve my subject, my intention, what I want to do with this drawing? What variations can I bring in, if any, to a mixed medium, to maybe the study of values also a little bit? I begin, see, as I do this warm-up, I begin to see and have ideas of, ooh, I know how I can, use more of the linear and these patches of hair, incorporating that into calling more attention to it without overworking maybe the detail of the line. And right away, you begin to get a sense of the curving and the growth of the fur, the direction of it. So we begin to think about all those things that began with the grip, that continue with the way you're seeing it, and a lot of line work would be involved in here. And I'm going to switch over to a mechanical pencil. And yes, this would not work over a wet surface right now, but you'll see that adding some of these lines here, and I'm going to just create, again, 100% blind drawing here, looking at patterns. Now, one of the things you may see me do today is this. My position is here. So when I want these lines not to struggle, I'm going to continue with the line direction that is comfortable. So I don't have to somehow lean over or around or force my wrist to kind of jitter at some of the creation, some of the direction of the lines. So adjusting a little bit the direction of your paper to follow the angle or follow the diagonal. And here's where, notice I'm doing zigzagging. I'm going to make it a little bit darker, although you could see the beginnings of just the tiniest of shift in direction and saturation of these lines can really create a beautiful, quick sketch. Let's go ahead and flip it all the way around here. And it just takes a little bit of, well, I'm looking at it upside down and my reference is not. So be careful with that. Just, it could shift the way you see your subject from the reference to the way you're seeing it on your paper. Those directions, those angles, make sure you give it a bit of extra, just a couple seconds of making sure the line is following the patterns and the directions, how you're actually seeing them. And there we go. So a lot more work, and most of the work, I think, beautiful work. Yes, it will be focused in here, our focal point that comes into this dark area, and the directions and the patterns of the lines as we have them coming from the head into the neck. And there we have it, a nice quick study that will now give me enough information to make a decision. Should I go with a bigger Bristol format? Or should I use it in my sketchbook? Do I have enough information about what I want to do? Notice I didn't even bring in ink lines. I could use this study to test that. And it won't be, I want to say, it's not about sometimes we're hesitant about our work becomes precious and we're afraid to test. That's what sketches are great for. I could test a little bit of ink line and how that will work with a combination of technique like this. And just drawing a couple of lines, starting here with some of these coming out of the eyes. Is this the right kind of pen, or should I be using a different version, a different gauge? That's also something you want to consider when you're using mixed media. Great idea always to test it. And to test it on the right paper too. So if I'm going to be using my sketchbook, it is a little bit of a different quality, different type of paper. So to have that in, and make sure you're considering that. Now, something about this ear is making me second guess the way it's curving in, as opposed to this one, which I know and I understand is concave in this direction. So I know I'm going to have to stop and pause here at how I'm going to develop the lines in this ear. And there we have it. That could absolutely work for me. I mentioned something else, which was we're doing drawing, mostly specific to line. But what if later on I bring in just a touch of, and by a touch of, I mean just a tiny touch. We don't want to turn this into, and again, of course you can, but then your focus will be away from drawing and more towards painting. So what I want to do here is maybe just a touch of color, and it'll be very, very selective, and it won't be overdone. So it could be small little things like maybe, and you have to be very careful what decision you make there to add color and keep the balance between that color and line, because very, very easily it could become something else. So there's my sketch, there's my tests, and sometimes it does get overwhelming. Oh my gosh, so many ideas, so many things. Well, ideally you would want to do all of them. And there we have it. So I am kind of struggling with the decision now if I should go with sketchbook, because it is smaller. It may allow me to do way more precise detail in the amount of time we have to focus, but also I'm going to have to work with way smaller lines, way smaller maybe pens, to get the level of detail that I want in here. So it could work. This actually larger format for the amount of detail that I want to put in would be too much. So I will go with my sketchbook. Although Bristol is a great option. Here we are. And I'm going to use the same water soluble. This is the Caran d'Ache Supra Color. And I just love the temperature and the saturation of the pigment when you wash. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to start with very light lines. I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger so everyone can see. And notice that in terms of light and shadow, when you squint at this, we have a cast shadow over here. We have a little bit of shadow going in between the leg and the head here. A little bit of shadow here on the top of the head. But overall, we have very light, delicate shifts. And it's mostly done with line. For the first wash, I want pretty much just what I did before, which is composition, proportions, and having a sense of, I want to see this big first shape overall, coming all the way to the edge, leaving a little space at the bottom, closer to the top. And I'm seeing all of it as just one big shape. Now, one thing I am going to try to work today, although it's very precise line work as you see it, I want to keep it loose. So from this stage, we begin that setup of how loose overall is your rendition of this subject going to be. Begin to see smaller shapes. So that early sketch was a rehearsal. Now I feel a little more confident about what I saw before, but I still revisit it as if I'd never seen it before, because there is a new sort of composition, smaller, the way I'm seeing some of these lines, the way I want to maybe enhance some of the curves and some of the measurements. Notice the grip. Very crucial to have that range of motion and that looseness in the hand. A lot of blind drawing, which means you have to keep your eyes on the subject. And this subject, usually from life, they'll stay there for a while. They won't be moving. So keeping your eyes on as you draw, as you capture the information, probably the most crucial part of what I'm doing now. Trusting, getting into that space. It's an interesting place where drawing just becomes, you don't know who's doing it. I know it's you moving your hand, but the way you're reading the information and making the decisions, it becomes truly just completely intuitive and confident. And that's what you want. I begin to see small relationships between what I call the tilts and the folds. Remember, we talk about the axis. In order for you to get the right pose, we want to see the symmetry and then kind of the eye line, the angle of the eye line. And you can actually, just by drawing across like this, center line, eye line, you can see if you're capturing the pose of this little cat's face. And I think right here, it helps you also break down and place other elements like this triangular shape. And I'm not thinking anything else but basic shapes here, not ear. And it helps place it perfect position in relationship to everything else. As you can see, it begins to create the fold. Bring me to another part of the anatomy. And I am curious to see how this watercolor paper with these washes is going to create a beautiful setup for the line work. Haven't really made a decision if that's going to be with ink or pencil. So this one here, we have a measurement, finding that angle, and we have a shape within the shape that needs to be considering the edge, and also because it will be a big feature for the top of the head, the right angles, and also the right size. But when you do that, make sure you stay loose as you continue trying to simplify. This is the area where I feel it gets more and more complex. Some of the shapes, I'm giving myself some clues as to the direction and the patterns. Beginning to get a little more specific with some of the shapes, some of the edges. And there are areas that will be a little more saturated, so I'm going to add a little bit of material. And I'm just doing that by parallel patterns here. So just zigzagging of lines mostly. You'll see that here. Just doing quick, and depending on how much material I'm ready to add, I should have a good idea of how it responds to the amount of water I'm also going to bring in. So at some point you really begin to think in terms of convex, concave, the roundness going up, in, or going around and in this direction, and following the rules in order to create that illusion. You really, really want to think about your direction, the line directions. And I think, well, just a few more lines. Don't really want to get into what I would usually call details here, but we do want some specific things. So I'm beginning to squint and see light, dark, whatever light, dark reads. I know it's not a lot of, shadows in the form. There's a nice cast shadow here, but just contrast, basically. So I could use a little bit of that better in my drawing. Here's my center line, which is really helping set this beautiful little nose right there. Just a couple of lines. I'm not going, and again, I'm trying to see that basic shape, that triangle coming down right into that tiny little mouth. But it's just angle and shape. No, you can't be thinking in terms of detail at this stage. Just a few lines and the proper position. So I'm going to be looking for, and I know here it gets, I mentioned earlier, that looseness where you see forms, and you try to develop directly from the line, meaning that shape of the line almost immediately delivers the illusion. And you absolutely can do that. I want to make that clear. Here's what I mean by that. We have a line, and you could draw lines, but just by drawing a line with intention of thinking about a form, you can actually begin to create the illusion of what that form is going to eventually render like. So one way to put it would be this. You have the line that creates the shape, and then from this shape, if you draw the line, just that one there, it immediately gives you that illusion. And the more lines you add, the more you can create the illusions of three-dimensional. So as I think of these types of lines, what I want to see is the shape, and beyond the shape, the form. And there's that muscle and bone shape, form, that you need to consider as you bring yourself to do these lines here. It's one way to get beyond just thinking of, oh, it's an eye, and this is just the type of line imitating, coming up with the bulk, roundness. Notice here I'm seeing the only way I could see it's basically the brow and the socket and the cheek and all those concave convex curves, all of it line direction. Now, I don't know if I want to go this far ahead with, but it is popping up. Some of these markings, they're going to really kind of push me way ahead. And I want to be a little more systematic. I want to be more strategic. This could come along. I'm going to do just a few touches where we have these darker bands, these darker stripes of hair here. And I'm just going to give myself just a couple hints. They're not intended to nowhere near what I would call finished. That's going to be most of the work we do a little bit later. And there we have it. I think at this point I could stop here. And wow, I mean, that's almost a finished drawing, some would say. Yes, I did add lots of information beyond just the simplified shapes. So here, I'm going to take advantage of that. Let me go back and add a little more material right here. And now I get to play with literally the technique of water soluble. So using water, going into the subject and drawing with it. I don't want to think of myself as painting a cat. I want to draw layers that I'm going to be able to draw over. And I want to keep this loose, but yes, a lot of it is blind drawing again, where I'm looking very closely at, if this is my first layer, how am I going to take advantage of second and third, whether that's with more wash, drawn wash, or with pencil or ink line. I think a beautiful thing that would work here would be color pencil as well, maybe just a black color pencil would come in beautifully. So all the different options. Also, the way I use the brush to draw, notice that I'm using some direction and gesture. And in terms of pressure, the gauge of what I would call the pressure on the line, in this case, it's the amount of water and the amount of, but mostly the speed of the brush stroke. I'm trying to keep it very loose. And it's creating these really just beautiful patches. I'm going to have to move this a little bit closer here. With a little more water. And also preserving my whites. So some of the brush strokes, I want them to be quick, gestural, loose, and also open, so they can allow, especially in this area, lots of white. The other thing I want to have, because of this technique, is a paper towel to lift. If there's too much material, I want to be able to push and lift. So also drawing with light, bringing some of that material in and out as needed. Now, whether you're using this technique or not, remember how you set yourself up for the strategy of, well, I don't know if I call that a drawing anymore, because it looks like you're painting it. It truly is it's not just semantics, it's the way you're thinking about it, the way you're executing, the intention of whether it was a pencil, a pen, in this case a brush, the line and the shape with a little bit of technique here, but it is possible to draw with the brush. And you should be able to feel that if you are using a technique like this. And yes, I know it could get just a bit borderline drawing painting and more like painting. That's where your style begins to get defined by you, really. Is it more painting? Is it more drawing? And when I draw, it has a bit of painting in it. And I hope what I'm saying is making sense. In my mind it does. And eventually I know you will come to the point where how you're using your techniques will force you to think about how you came up with that vision, that idea, and how the execution of it would benefit the outcome. And you may be doing it and don't even know it or think about it in terms of what I was just saying, drawing or painting. And you may be going back and forth from drawing to painting. No matter. It's a little harder to paint with graphite, that's true. But it can be done. So there it is. And oh my gosh, I'm already happy. And the level of detail that I'm going to add, the quality of line that I want to add to this from this point is going to be, it's got to be delicate because this came out and it's already giving me the sense of, the body, the volume that I wanted. But yes, it does need a bit of enhancement. I think ink would be too much. So I am going to go with graphite. And just like I did in the early sketch, I'll use those patterns and quality of line. Maybe go from a 2H, HB, 2B to a 4B, 6B with a little heavier line. And again, begin to play with the shape and the form and the direction of the hair patterns. Now, the other thing is if you're able to zoom in and see it a little bit closer, kind of deconstruct it into segments, like let's work on this abstract area and forget that it's a tail and just really read the pattern and the shape and the form of it. And I mentioned one comfortable thing that you can do is just tilt, depending on how you're set up, so the pose, and adjusting to the direction of your line. So I'm going to start here in this area. It's all about the grip. You want to use loose grip that will deliver the quality of line. And when I go from grip, I also have to talk about not just direction, but the pace. So there's grip, then notice the pace. Obviously, we're always talking about pressure, so the heaviness or lightness of the line. There's the pace again, the direction, and the gesture of the line, the quality of the line, the technique of the line. I've been using mostly a zigzag parallel pattern here, kind of diagonal. Some of the layering of some of these lines. And the tapering of some of these lines, all the different things. Not that you need to name them, just, like I did, pressure, direction, pace. But you need to be aware of it, the feeling of it. If it feels right, so you're not rushing. And what else am I thinking about? Well, remember, these lines are creating the illusion of a form. So this, are we going to call it, I'll say the joke, a flat butt or a rounder butt? And I'm going to have to add some rounder patterns. For the tail, is this fluffy, chunky, or is it nice, slim and, and according to that, just create the textures. Because see, the patterns of hairs here, where I break the line or I zigzag, makes this napping cat look kind of frizzy or cozy, shampooed, I guess. So yes, the look and the texture, all of it comes from these variations in quality of line that you can do here. You're also thinking about contrast and all the other elements of drawing here, where the contrast and I mean contrast of the length, the size, obviously the value, darkness of your line will affect other areas. And one of them, the sharpness. Notice how some of these lines get blurrier, just softer, blurrier, and hint at what's going on in the anatomy in this area without being super specific. And we see there, it begins to come together. Now, I don't want it to look streaky, like I did a row and then another row, and then I could see the space in between. You do see some of it in this sample, but there's ways you can kind of adjust the overall from biggest to simplest would be my recommendation. But obviously you have areas where there's some like little areas where there's break to the pattern, break to the roundness, and it would be in this area here, right at this turn here, and here it gets bigger. So one easy way would be to create a layer. Now this I'm doing cautiously, and one layer that will make almost everything look a little more uniform. And then from that layer, I'll create the somewhat cross-hatching patterns. And you see them here with some of that zigzag that enhances just a little bit more what's going on. And it actually does break a little bit of light in between and give you these more realistic anatomical variations here. Pay close attention to the curve and the direction of these lines. Now the way it's working with my original medium, they're not fighting. It's not overpowering. The pencil's working beautifully. Ink might have been a little too loud for this type of wash. So I'm glad I used pencil. And I'm glad I used this as a HB pencil. So also the contrast between these two, I think it's actually working really, really well. And as we add more and more material, we begin to see how they compete and how they're making other things look darker or lighter. So we proceed with a little caution, but looseness. Just being aware of what's happening. And remember, the more you look at your reference, and honestly, as we approach the finish, the end of your drawing, the more you have to look at it, the more things become complex and specific, the more attention, the more focus you have to place into some of these techniques that can make or break all of the setup work. And it is about understanding. Are you understanding what's going on? And what I mean by that is the lines that will create the shape that will eventually give me a form that will handle and read as what I'm seeing in my subject. Sometimes it takes not just minutes, but it could take days or months to study something and understand it until you then execute it and got it. And it could take more than one try. And the more you do it, the more clues you pick up. Some, technique-wise, shortcuts of how to get there from the get-go. Where you become absolutely, without a doubt, more confident on how to approach. Well, this is complex, so I'm going to leave this for later. But there is a nice area. There's a bounce of light contrast that plays with hard edge lines and sharp into really dark. But there's a lot of shaping here with convex, concave, lines that I'll have to take my time with. But for now, we move on. Move on into this nice, you can see this cat is well fed right in here. This line coming from the side of the belly. And all along, we're making judgments and adjustments. Hopefully, patiently planning with that vision that we had early on. Did I imagine that it was I hoped it was gonna work somewhat this way, but there's no way I could know. And that's the beauty of art. You get to think about something and then you get to go for it and then you get to be surprised about how it came out. Always. Because no matter how even hyper-realistic you want to be, your subject will always surprise you. Your technique and your execution and the mediums will always bring you to a place of awe. Hopefully of exciting awe that makes you want to repeat it. What a beautiful little gesture here. I'm beginning to darken some of these patterns of lines that are the markings in and around the face. And this is where I have to be more careful because I went with a smaller format. So the smaller format gives you less chance of being more specific with such delicate details. So there's always that perfect size that you're going to find yourself working with. Whether it's you like to work small or you have to go large in order to do some of these type of lines and details. Also, depending on the subject you choose to work with. But this really gets very, very specific here with the more complex it looks, you actually break it down and you realize, well, it's just touches of lines. Literally, you can count them. But they are so well placed, so precise in every aspect. I'm talking about shape, direction, value, combination. They become very, very delicate, very measured. But you could see very loose. So they're calculated, but confident and loose. Measured. And the only way you get there is really looking and simplifying your subject. Because if you wanted to draw every single hair, well, we're talking about millions and millions of lines. But here we have a patch of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, gives us the entire bulk of this mass of hair here. And the combination of, and the shifting contrast gives us the way light is working in and around. I'm working my way up to this ear so I can continue this area. And I know it's going to match pretty much the value. So I could do the same. I want to do it a little more careful this time. Usually just a light layer following the curve in the direction, but it's a lot flatter. So it's somewhat of a filling, like a filler for the area. Biggest, simplest lines in this shape. And then from there, it almost works already. Too generic. Here we break it up with a little bit of curve, and here we come with the patterns. And just the touch of curve that you add to that line immediately creates that sense of, I mean, there's no other way to put it, texture and anatomy. Going right back into the ear. And gesturing a lot of these lines in. Notice that the gesture could be continuous or it could break up. You're going to have to think, which type of line am I applying here? That will work best to create that illusion. So I would love if I could put it, think of a ping pong, and if you want lines that would depict the three-dimensionality of it, you want to follow the shape almost as if you were drawing the line on the actual object. So on the ping pong, they would be going really curved. So you bring that here onto the paper and you identify the shape. Simplifying it, of course, is what I recommend. And then break it down, imitating the motion as if you were literally running the pencil on on this cat's side here, the cheek. So what direction would that pencil have to follow? And then emulating that will get you way closer. That plus using the rules and techniques, the tricks that will allow you to continue simplifying and still delivering. Well, there's interesting curves and variations of value in these curve lines here that are, I knew they were going to be, I don't want to say trouble, but you're going to have to pause here and really look at it. Hopefully, ideally, zoom in and make it abstract so you can really truly see what you need to. Going over the previous pattern now, seeing how light I need to be so it doesn't compete. Using that first layer and going just off. Whether you choose just a parallel hatch pattern or a zigzag pattern. I'm doing a bit of a cross hatch with the previous layer, just very, very subtle. The saturation of the line as well. How you choose that, meaning how close and the sharpness of the line. Saving the best for last. There's so much going on here. Wow, and that neck. So I am going to zoom in. Finally, zoom in a little more. Wow, and it really helps immediately. Seeing some crossing types of lines, some simplified areas, and it is the advantage of simplifying and abstracting. You got to be careful. You got to be careful to make sure you're following the section, the area, and that one area is not, how could I say, getting away from and affecting all the other areas. So it is one way to work, and areas like this, that's what I find always comes in handy. Bring it to a place where you can't add thoughts that will take you out of what's important. And really look closely. It's easy to lose your place here because we have so much information. You can go from one area to the next, which are right next to each other, and lose your intention, meaning what you were focusing on, or place, especially if you are zoomed in like I am and seeing it as abstract. There's no, how do you pick your reference spot? What is your anchor to come back to? Well, the key is keeping your eyes on the subject. That's literally the easiest way. And having somewhat of it is a strategy and discipline to don't jump around. you know, okay, I'm going to finish this area here, and that may maybe take me somewhere else, but I'll just follow it, finish it, or get it near the place that I need it to be. So you see these very delicate little lines here. Notice how many values. And also, because I had those washes, some of these areas could get a little too heavy, too quick. So I want lightness, I want fluffiness. If you could hear the sound of, well, that's actually my dog walking in the room, but no. It's the sound of the graphite and the paper. You almost want to go silent for some of the level of lines that I want to create here. And obviously others will get scratchier, heavier. I did add those early clue here, the clue touches of some of the lines for these markings. And I think I'm going to have to create another layer, softer, all across the head here. Because there's a lot of information with crosses and some of the curves. You don't want to do that one by one. You want to play with the technique. There's enough information here. And yes, we have some of these right above and curving down that are kind of unique, specific. You know, that broken line. That is time consuming, but generally speaking, you can have a nice light layer that will enhance the look of these individual ones. Like I said, it's always making a good choice that comes from seeing and understanding the information. Are you seeing it, or are you just making it up? And remember, it's very few things that you have to think about when you're trying to see it. And you're trying to see it simplified. Think of line direction, think of value, and how can I create that illusion. Well, so far here, it is working, I feel. Moving into this area of the ear, lots of curve here into the shadow. Had that early layer, and then we break. I've only used one pencil all the way through, HB. I think at this stage, probably benefiting from when I'll get into the darkers, I'll switch over to a 2B maybe. And I have different mechanical pencils with different leads. I do that mostly for convenience. And because they're also, I just love drawing with mechanical pencils. They're always sharp. The type of line that you can control. It's really rich. I'm asking a question now. What happens if I bring back my water soluble and add touches on top of the pencil. Again, that's the beauty of mixed media. You get to play, and eventually, I always say it, you'll get to a place where people will ask you, how did you do that? And it's a beautiful thing, because if you create variations to the image where it is not absolutely obvious, meaning, well, it's a pencil drawing and it's a beautiful rendering and it looks real. But if you add something to it that makes the viewer wonder, whoa, how was that done? You're doing magic, basically. It is literally magician. No one can help asking how. I know it's not real, but I'm looking at it with my own eyes and I still can't believe it's how it was done. So how did you do that? And magicians never say they reveal their tricks. We do. We say, listen, well, there's a mixture of washes with some pencil lines, and then I brought back a second layer of wash that was just to highlight certain things, and there you go. Most times when I go to galleries, museums, that's the one thing that it's still, when you've seen a lot and you think you've seen everything, there's always something that just grabs your attention, and it generally is the new way of presenting something that you've seen a million times. Paint, pencil, ink, and makes you go, whoa, how was that done? Especially when you're presented with all the evidence right there in front of you and still can't figure it out. As an artist, you have an advantage. You'll know some of these tricks, so you'll be able to figure out how others were able to do their tricks. Really intricate work with curves and combinations, saturations, patterns. Patient line work. Really, really getting to know your lines. Zooming out just a little bit. I want to get these. And again, I'm going to create another very light filler in the direction with a tiny touch of roundness to the line. Parallel hatch, kind of zigzagged, where I begin to see how it almost works already. And then, once again, some of the cross-hatch patterns, individual sections with anatomy, with the curving, and some of the fuzziness coming out of the subject here, and the curve. Lots of nice layers of curve here. That's what gives this head neck area a beautiful. It almost holds the image together. That plus the cast shadow, the way they're working, I think that's one of my favorite areas here. Of course, the face, beautiful little face, but this here, that roundness, curve, and the muscle, fleshy tone that it has. It feels familiar if you've ever taken a nap, like a cat. Where you kind of curl up, ball up. So I am going to touch this up because I have areas of contrast here. Notice how some of these dark, 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 they're supposed to be lighter. So this got a little too dark. And I'm talking about these stripes. So I have to make this darker. I'm going to add just a little more material here just to see how it goes. That's not pencil. Very, very little. And then I'm going to wash it. And there it goes. Kind of drag it out, draw with it. And I was thinking about doing that for some of the furry markings here in the head. The other idea would be to work with a darker pencil, maybe a 2B. So let me go ahead and switch that. 2B. Here it is. I also have not just a heavier line, but I also have different gauges. So you have these mechanical pencils that happen to be, this is a 05, which is the most popular, but I also have a 03 and then a 07, 09. And I also have different leads on them. So you have thicker and darker. I'm going to try that. Oh, immediately. Easy solution. Just what happens here? Well, I have to do less lines. Less touches. And it automatically feels way more efficient, way more immediate. And I think I'm reaching an area where I gotta begin the usual warning. Don't overcook it. Especially when you have something that is so intricate and delicate. Just a different view. To show you just a couple of details. Here we are. So just a couple of close-ups where you hopefully could see the quality of the line and the layers of the line and that extra, see, that's mostly the early wash with the watercolor pencil. There's the variation to the saturations there, and everything else just touches of light, medium, and darker. That thick one here you see right there, that is the 07 with 2B. And just touching it on, it's incredible how it immediately just brought it. So knowing all those variations, I could have done this honestly a little bit better with a little more patience, using a 2H, then the 2B, and jumping to 4B would have been more obvious. But there it is, quality of line, managing the edges. not getting too inconsistent with the patterns. This was a little more consistent pattern. Nice curves to the lines. And just like that, we have our cat. And what a fun project. One last thing I want to do. I mentioned color. So I have beautiful lines. Does it need color? It's risky, but I do want just a touch. I mean, it's rich. It's on watercolor paper, and most of the things you see in this sketchbook are birds and animals that are mostly drawn, ink line or pencil line with, yeah, sometimes heavy color. Let's grab our paper towel. But I do want just a touch of color. And it may be a bit too much with the water soluble. See that nice touch of pink right on the nose? I'm going to bring a touch of yellow ochre. It's the amount of color that you bring in and how much is too much. Also, the graphite with water, it could get gray and murky, and so you're risking. That's why just a few touches right here on the cheek, right here on the other cheek. And I had considered, as early on in the sketch, just a touch on the tail. But I think just a bit on the nose, cheeks, and maybe just one touch over here. Very, very light. Touch of pink in the ear, and just another little bit right here. It's easy to get carried away. Very easy to get carried away. So this is one variation to the technique, where it's still a drawing, with touches of color, and not a painting of a cat. And I think that's where I would stop, because I know what comes next. Too much. Or at least for now, just let it sit, look at it for a while, let it speak back to you, and then make any other decisions based on what you see. But I gotta be happy. And I hope you guys enjoyed it.